อบโจทย์คืนนี้จะคุยเรื่องราวเกี่ยวกับประชากรครึ่งหนึ่งบนโลกใบนี้นะคะก็คือประชากรผู้หญิงค่ะ 3,500 ล้านคนนะคะจากประชากรโลกทั้งหมด 7,000 ล้านคนมีปัญหามากมายนะคะเกี่ยวกับนโยบายด้านผู้หญิงที่ทางสหประชาชาติก็กำลังเร่งผลักดันไปสู่นโยบายของหลายๆประเทศทั่วโลกนะคะวันนี้แขกรับเชิญค่ะคุณซาราสวาติเมนอนนะคะผู้อำนวยการฝ่ายนโยบายของ UN Women ในโอกาสที่มาประชุมที่ประเทศไทยวันนี้จะมาพูดคุยในตอบโจทย์ค่ะ Thank you for joining me, Director Menon.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
You come here for a meeting with among experts on genders in Thailand. What's the result have you discussed and what do you find as the biggest obstacle for women all over the world in terms of violence against women?
We met here for 4 days and we brought together UN Women and other UN agencies brought together 20 experts from all over the world who have worked on combating violence against women in their societies, in their governments and through civil society. And they came with very different experiences. In some countries, the problem is domestic violence primarily. In other countries, it's violence in public spaces. In yet other places, there's violence in a conflict situation. And essentially what they discussed was that this violence is really a result of the way society is structured. And unless we deal with social norms and the way people perceive each other, boys perceive girls, girls perceive boys, men perceive women, women perceive men, we cannot make a change. And violence, it was clear from what they said that across the world, not only in developing countries, not only in poorer countries, violence is a scourge that affects every single country in the world.
Does the root cause of the problem come from social norm, from mindset of people that violence against women is private issue, not a public issue?
Exactly. It comes from a perception that this is something that is all right. And there are many things, including the media, pop culture, etc., which reinforce this understanding that men should exert power over women. And if women step out of line or women question, then the reaction, it's all right to be violent. We have seen from the facts that, from the studies that some of the experts brought to this meeting, that where there are societies where children are punished by a slap at home for doing something which is wrong, in those cases there is a much greater likelihood of violence against women later on. So in a way it comes not only from an understanding of the role of women, but it also comes from an understanding of violence itself. And there is a condoning of violence in the society, which is problematic.
What's the region do you find having the most difficult problem in tackling with violence against women in the world? What's the region? Middle East, in Europe, Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia?
I think in all regions it's a problem and the manifestation may be a little bit different. And from studies they say about at least nearly 7 in every 10 women have suffered some kind of violence during their lifetime, which is a huge number, 70%. If you look at that number, it's much higher than people who have suffered in conflict or in wars. So the incidence of violence is the highest of any form of violence. Now when you look at it in an abstract sense, it happens everywhere. I think you cannot say that one region is worse than the other. The problem is that in many regions you are not really dealing with the specific manifestation, the specific form that it takes in a society. Let us take this region. We look, some of the experts came from the Pacific region, and they had brought very interesting studies because nobody understood the incidence of violence in all the islands. So studies were done to see whether this really is an issue. And it was the case. 2 in every 3 women had suffered some form of violence.
It may sound easy, but in practice, women may find it difficult to do so because mostly or some women still tolerate violence from their husband because they have fear or they feel insecure to live with him in the family. So how should we change this mindset of women?
It's not only fear. I think it's part of the way we are all brought up. There was a survey done in Thailand, and 7 out of 10 women felt that it is all right for their husbands to be violent towards them. So they internalize it. They think this is normal life. So we have to change these perceptions. We have to understand that to treat each other with respect means that we do not spank our children, we are not violent to each other, and we treat each other with respect. So this means, I think, change from the very beginning, from early childhood, from schooling, from all what we see in the media. So it's a huge effort. It can be done because many societies are trying it, and there are changes. We do see improvements. We see much better response to violence. Many countries have, these one-stop shops. So a woman who suffers violence can go there and get legal aid, can get physical, mental support, health support, a whole range of support. So people are trying to address this issue. But until we recognize the problem and we recognize that it is everybody's business, it's not going to change.
Dr. Menon, you have been working on this issue for many years. How do you see that the situation been improved? Has it been improved or not? Or has it been staying the same for a long, long time?
I think there are definitely improvements. I think the improvements can be seen from the fact that many governments are taking action in this area. They are developing laws against violence, against domestic violence. Many of them have developed judicial systems which are much more accessible to women. Because one of the problems, and we have discussed this also, if something happens in a very remote rural area, and you are telling a woman, report this incidence of violence, she has to travel to a police station which is very far away. She cannot work that day on the land. She has to pay for that transport. In some countries, we've heard this happening in Africa, the police will ask her to pay for their petrol to go to do the investigation. Poor women cannot afford this. So the system of the police and judiciary is such that it prevents women from accessing justice. So one of the things that we see changing is in many societies, they are coming with new justice systems which are much more accessible to women.
We have been talking about form of physical violence against women. What about the other form of emotional violence or other forms of violence against women? Can you give us some more examples?
I think there are many ways in which violence takes place. And as you said, physical is really in your face and we see it and women suffer. The mental violence is often from the point of view where men or a partner or whoever demeans the woman, makes them feel small, makes them feel that they cannot do what others can do, and continuously put them into a box where they cannot exercise their own thinking, their choices, their ideas. And this happens very often. In fact, that is probably more prevalent than direct physical violence. And it's much more difficult to catch, much more difficult to deal with. Because as I said, when you have physical violence, your neighbor will know. And if your neighbor is a good person, he or she will come and intervene. But if there is mental violence, it's very difficult for society to intervene.
In order to integrate the policy to battle with violence against women, do you think government all over the world should integrate into their social policy?
Absolutely. And it's not just something that has to be integrated into the work of the women's organization or into the social ministries. Dealing with violence requires working on these issues in every single ministry or every single department of the government. There are judicial implications, as I discussed, access to justice for those. There are health implications. So the health ministry has to think through how do you provide services. There are educational issues, because if we want to change the mindset, if we want people to understand that men and women are equal and violence is not acceptable, then this has to start from the educational system. So in every sector of government activity, this issue of violence against women has to be addressed. And to do this well, we have seen governments where they try to coordinate the work. So they put violence against, they develop a national action plan on violence against women. 120 countries have a national action plan on violence against women. Others have integrated these issues into their development plan, into their budget, and it's very important that there is money, that you don't only say you are committed to stopping violence, but you also put money behind it. But this is a big effort, and just passing one law or just saying that we are against violence against women is just not enough.
Should women participate more in politics? Will it help solving the problem?
Absolutely. I think women's participation in politics has been an area where we have seen great progress and not enough progress, obviously, but in many countries there has been progress. At the Beijing Conference on Women, which was nearly 20 years ago, and even before, they said that having at least 30% of parliamentarians as being women makes a difference. And it makes a difference because the debates in parliament change. And how do they change? Women start raising issues related to security of the home, related to education, related to health, because they are the ones who often manage these issues within the household and within the community. But very few countries have reached that level of 30% in parliament. We have recently seen Rwanda, Tunisia, after the revolution. They are closer to that level, but very few have reached that level. If you look at heads of state, I think we have about 19, including in Thailand, who are women, and this is a head of government in this case. And this is an important signal. Why is it an important signal? It shows that women are equal to men in terms of leadership. And therefore, what it does is it promotes young girls and young boys understanding that at the end of the day, it is the quality of the leadership that you provide that is important for the country. It's not whether you are a man or a woman. And this improves respect of the other sex.
So far, what have stopped women from participating in politics?
What has held women back? Women have been held back largely because across the world, the sort of what we call the division of labor, the traditional division of labor of responsibilities for women and men within the home, have resulted in a huge burden of work falling on women, including childcare, management of household resources, in many rural communities, fetching water or getting the firewood or doing even the basic production activities around the household. Now, this occupies a lot of time, and women don't have the luxury of either engaging with the public community, developing leadership qualities, standing for election, and being part of a democracy. But this is changing. And I think here, in many countries, you see as women become more active in economic life, they leave the home, they manage the home together with the spouse, and they enter the public space. And once they're in the public space in economic activity, why should they stop in political activity? But in order to encourage this a little bit more, I think having what we call measures which are maybe temporary, don't have to last forever, such as the quota system, do help. And quota systems are not intended to be there forever, but what they're intended to do is, if you have a very unequal playing field, to make it a little bit more equal so that men and women can compete equally.
Last year, we see in the news a lot how women participate in terms of changes in the Middle East, in Arab Spring. But the role of women after that may be overlooked or maybe ignored. Do you see it like that?
Yes, and I think we had representatives from the Middle East in our expert group meeting, and it was a very interesting discussion with them, because they said at the early part of the Arab Spring, and we saw it on the TV screens everywhere, women were on the streets, young women were on the streets, and they were active with the other students and so on. But what has happened since then is, in many of the societies, more conservative elements have come to power, have been elected to power. And even where women have got a role in parliament, etc., there is a big debate going on in these societies on what is the role of women. Should they be in the public space? Should they be dealing much more with the home in a traditional way? And I think it will be something that will have to be resolved by the women in those regions, in that region themselves. But in a sense, in some of those countries, such as Egypt, they actually had very good laws. Equal property rights, they had access to education, etc. And so they will, I think, be fighting to preserve some of that and also to advance it. But it is a difficult time for women in the Middle East.
And we are now in digital world.
Yes.
How do you see the role of social media in improving or empowering for women?
It is extremely important. I think my generation, we learned from books and from the cinema and from from TV. Of course, that was a very important element. But more and more for youth, their ideas and their aspirations are being determined by what they see on YouTube or Twitter or in the pop culture, on the social media. And some of it, when we were discussing violence against women, is very, very negative portrayal of women. Portraying women as weak, portraying women as sex objects, portraying women as having really a purpose which is only to serve men and not otherwise. And in some cases, and it's very unfortunate, they are actually violent portrayals of women. Now, if young people see this day in, day out, it colors their thinking. They think this is all right. This becomes the way they behave also. So violence becomes a way of life for them. Violence against women becomes a way of life for them. So social media has a huge negative impact on people. Now, but I want to highlight the positive impact, because I think we need to recognize that in the same way that these images are sort of feeding into people's minds, we need to promote the images that show women as equal partners, women as making a contribution to society, women as leaders, women as, you know, walking hand in hand with men and making a difference. You know, we try to show in UN Women as much as we can, when we show conflict countries, the contribution that women make to building peace.
But what if mainstream media think the form of the image of independent women may not sell commercially?
That is a real problem, and that is actually, it's big money that supports this portrayal of women, and we have to deal with that. So again and again, we have seen in the UK, for instance, they have a government body which does not regulate, because there's freedom of the press, but at least make sure that the press, or, you know, these ads and so on, do not promote hatred between races, do not promote hatred or violence between men and women. So they have a body that at least takes these issues up. So women and men, if they see something that is inappropriate, they call this. They phone the number and they say, please do something about this. So there is a social responsibility which both the government as well as citizens have to take in order to deal with this. But you are right. Why do we see this? It's because it sells.
In the south of Thailand, we are now talking a lot about peace process. How do you see the role of women in the south of Thailand to be contributing to the peace process?
I think I don't know the details of the peace process, but I think, like in many other areas, women have a huge contribution to make. In many cases, when we have a conflict, the people who carry the guns or start the conflict are men. And so when you come to the negotiating table, who is invited to the negotiating table? The men. Because it's by dealing with those who started the conflict that you will create the peace. But that is a very short-sighted view of the problem. If you want to build a peace that will last, you need the whole community involved. And bringing women as agents of change, as partners of change, from the process of negotiation and designing what will happen afterwards is critical, because then you build the seeds of a very stable peace. A solid peace in which the entire community is involved. So I hope in Thailand also, and we know how active women are in economic life in Thailand and the contribution that they make, I hope women are also involved in these discussions and in thinking about what the future should be like.
ASEAN is coming to ASEAN community in 2015. Yes. What should be women aware of their role in order to go into ASEAN community?
In the ASEAN community, you have countries with very different sort of social makeup and very different positions of women, status of women. I think there have been huge advances in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of economic opportunities for women and men in the ASEAN, because this is a growth, this is a center of growth for the whole world as a whole. But in addition to that, I think in the area of politics, and in the area of ending violence against women, there is a lot of work to be done still in this region. And you know, you have a very, very active civil society, women's organizations in this region. So it's not as though what needs to be done is not known. I think people know what needs to be done, but it is getting the energy, getting the commitment, and working with the governments to ensure that the right laws are in place and the right mechanisms are in place and the right budget and funding is also in place. I think that is critical. But these two areas, I would say, politics, political participation, and ending violence against women are very important.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Menon, for joining me in ตอบโจทย์ค่ะเป็นการฉายภาพนะคะสถานะของผู้หญิงที่กำลังเกิดขึ้นทั่วโลกโดยเฉพาะแนวทางแก้ปัญหาความรุนแรงที่กำลังเกิดขึ้นกับผู้หญิงนะคะทางคุณเมนอนมองว่าแนวทางแก้ปัญหาก็ควรจะมาจากการเมืองผู้หญิงน่าจะเข้าไปมีส่วนร่วมทางการเมืองมากยิ่งขึ้นนะคะก็จะช่วยวางนโยบายและเข้าไปมีส่วนร่วมได้มากขึ้นค่ะทั้งหมดคือตอบโจทย์สำหรับคืนนี้ค่ะดิฉันณัฐฐา โกมลวาทินสวัสดีค่ะ